know a bit more about what you are doing.
Okay. Well, broadly, my interest is how culture works in everyday life. And in particular, I have an interest in political culture, and I think that there's nothing that's more political right now than migration in many parts of the world, particularly in the United States, where I've done a lot of my empirical work. I also have an interest in new media, so I just finished a book this past year about how immigrant rights groups and immigration control groups mobilize online and how they represent immigrants, and in particular unauthorized immigrants. I'm interested in the debates that take place about so-called illegal or unauthorized migrants. And after I finished that book, it was published by Paul Grave in 2016, I did a study on media coverage of refugees entering the United States and Canada. So I'm looking at newspapers and how they talk about refugees coming into the country. And it's a comparative study to look at before and after the Paris terrorist attacks of November 2015. So, and which also was the height of the so-called refugee crisis in Europe. And I also am interested in doing narrative or biographical interviews with refugees. Unfortunately, a lot of refugees don't come into the Czech Republic, but I'm working with a colleague in Austria, and we're interviewing some refugees now. And if I had to say, my next direction might go more toward policy and policy on refugees.
It's paramount, the change that is taking place at the moment, sort of a shift in our civilization, in the idea of solidarity and the reception of those who are seeking refuge, is fading basically.
Mm-hmm.
What is basically going on in the States? What's your position on this process? What does that mean in terms of our modernity, our project of civilization? Is it being teared down? It was already coming down years before.
And this is just another notch taking it down. I mean, the humanitarian impulse, it seems to me, is fading. And that kind of solidarity on a universal level, on a humanistic level, it seems to me is breaking down. People are talking about so many issues to do with refugees. They talk about their homelands and the war tearing them apart, but they don't talk about the humanity of the people and how it's an obligation or a duty to offer refuge to those who need it.
And this comprehension from a cultural perspective seems to be able to get into such depth into this phenomenon, while at the same time our institutions and our institutional framework seem to remain backwards in the face of what's happening nowadays.
Yeah, I think that a deeply cultural perspective is really important to take, because there is so much rhetoric about migration of all kinds, not just refugees, but what people often in a very derogatory way refer to as economic migrants. And I think by being able to look at the meaning-making processes, how people construct meanings around the things they say and do around migrants is of crucial importance. I mean, people forget a lot of things. They forget that people essentially, for the most part, don't want to leave their home. It's your homeland, it's where your family is, it's where you grew up, it's what you're familiar with. And so migration can be a pretty desperate act, whether it's so-called forced migration or voluntary. But if you can't feed your family and you can't exist, how voluntary is that sort of migration?
And so, in this sense, what's the contribution that cultural sociology can make to the field of migration studies? What are the major theoretical perspectives and methodologies that apply in this area?
Well, the main theoretical perspective is that culture has what we call relative analytical autonomy, that culture is structured, much like any other social structures of more material kinds, and that it has a causal effect on social life in every aspect. And so by granting culture this status, you give the importance to meanings, and the main methodology is the reconstruction of deep meanings, and not just performing what we might call a structural hermeneutics, where you're looking for meaning, but you understand that culture is structured, but to try to find systems of meaning, and especially around migration. For example, if you look at migration in the economy, one thing that I found in my book when I was doing the research for immigrant rights groups, talk about migrants and their economic contributions in a way that would qualify them for citizenship. So the concept was something that I called civic economic participation. And this is a structure of meaning that ran through the texts they put online, the graphics they put on Facebook, and this cultural structure, civic economic participation, goes a long way in explaining their strategies and why and how they do some of the things they do to mobilize on behalf of immigrants.
Latin America has always been a region that has produced migrants rather than receiving them. But nowadays it seems that with the Venezuelan case and also other situations like Colombians or Peruvian migrating towards Chile, there is a new interest. So what kind of contribution you reckon your perspective could make in the region, and what kind of potential there exists for academic interchange in terms of students, masters or PhD, etc., going up from Colombia to the States to study these issues?
Well, I think that, I heard there was something like 470,000 Venezuelan migrants coming into Colombia.
It's a very new situation.
Very new situation. And I think that as sociologists, we have to look at the different levels of conversations that are going on. There's going to be political conversations, there's going to be conversations in the media, there's going to be conversations in civil society by different actors, NGOs, and all of that. And I think that we have to disentangle what's being said in all these different arenas of social life about the migrants coming in, because that's no small number. That's enough to have a profound effect.
Well, Professor, thank you for your contribution to this short space in the Economic Journal of Sociology, and we wish you a very good stay in Colombia.
Thank you very much.